Welcome to The Leaders Who Care, a podcast powered by Dynamis Group. We are here to give the stage and support to those committed to create a positive and lasting impact, way beyond the profits and margins, the leaders of the world who care for others and serve a bigger purpose. Join us on the journey of creating a better, more caring world. And now to your host, Marian Temelkov.
Happy Wednesday, dear audience, and welcome back on the 118 episodes of The Leaders Who Care. As you know, we are on a mission to bring together some of the most caring leaders from every corner of the world and every industry and area, so that we can share useful insights that can help you rise and prosper in a caring way. I have the privilege to welcome today someone that is really dear and also one of the greatest leaders as far as taking care of people and human resources is concerned. He's based in Netherlands, and most recently he was chief HR officer of one of the most impactful companies in the world, a company called Signify, and this was the former Phillips lighting organization. And previous to that, he's done a number of different experiences. But above all, the reason why we invited him is because of what he has done and how he's touched people's lives, and not only at a one-to-one, but also at scale, at large organizations. I had the privilege to welcome Mark van Bijsterveld. Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome on The Leaders Who Care.
Thank you, Marian. It's been great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm feeling honored. And looking forward to the conversation.
It is a pleasure, indeed. Well, greetings. I take the opportunity to greet Netherlands, really very beautiful country, a very dear country to my heart as well. And of course, also to really celebrate. Probably it's very nice right now over there with lots of flowers, celebrating the obviously the country's blossoming, as we say.
I would say everything is growing and blossoming. We had a little bit of rain, which is nice after only sunshine. So I think the flowers are doing great.
Well, starting with that, because looking at Netherlands, and you're very famous for many things, apart from being very colorful and diverse in nature, also great traders from ancient times. Not to go too much in history with the British, that's a separate topic here, but really that's because culture does matter, and that's why we're mentioning. Sometimes people say that the Dutch are direct and quite open and honest, which actually the way things should be, but and since culture is a big topic today, we'd love to talk about really culture, belongingness, and how to help people thrive at work. I bring this topic as well because you've worked on a global level, and you've met a lot of cultures and a lot of different people in diversity. We talk about diversity a lot nowadays, and is that starting with that topic really on diversity? Do you see a link between the diversity of the workforce and the performance of the organization?
Yes, without any doubt, we clearly see a direct connection, and it's actually broader than diversity, right? So when we talk about from a human resources and people perspective, we started with the concept of diversity, but we clearly and quickly expanded that to equity and inclusion, right? So because you can have diversity, but without being able to glue that together into something that's really a team and thriving as a team, you will not see back the results that you're looking for. But it already starts of reflecting your customer base. How can you bring the best products and the best services to your customers if you don't truly understand them? And so it's also about having a diversity within your organization that's reflected of the society that you're working in, the labor market, and your customers. And we've seen that as a growing topic in the last years in the area of human resources, but also in company strategy in general. And I think it goes beyond the regulatory and compliance elements that we've seen also there. I think especially in the United States, I think that has always been pretty strong. But in Europe, we see it now as a growing topic, not only from, you could say it's the right thing to do from a compliance and a regulatory perspective, but actually to make companies where people thrive. And to make companies where people are, where indeed results are also thriving, if you create that diverse teams. But it's a broader challenge because diversity is about representation and having the different personalities, cultures, gender, all represented in your organization. But then what do you do with that, right? So how do you then create a team? How do you create an inclusive culture where actually all voices are heard around the table and are taken seriously, and where you build upon each other and actually are creating the best solutions for your customers.
Let's dissect this a little bit, because part of our audience actually is leaders that run multi-billion organizations or scale-ups, in fact, founders of scale-ups. And these are two different, of course, challenges altogether. And but looking at, you mentioned very nicely that creating a culture or helping organizations to reach a level where people can thrive at work and feel a really sense of belongingness. Let's dissect that a little bit and say, how do we achieve that? Because if we look at today's world with COVID, with the war with uncertainty, there's a lot of challenges with remote work, with the new generation coming in and refusing to work in the old way. We're starting to see more than ever that change and that shift, that the old ways or the traditional way of leadership, of running from the top down, and is more and more ineffective in that aspect. I would love to hear your thoughts, because you have been very closely at the forefront of that, to understand the different leadership styles and what works, what doesn't. Just to break it down to, how do we go? Let's say we may not be there today, but how can we help leaders or organizations to become a place where people can thrive, not survive?
Yeah. No, I think it's a great big question, and maybe to kind of to zoom in a bit on the problem that we see. And I think the audience, and especially when I talk to CEOs, but also to startup companies, they feel the problem, right? And they feel the challenge, because it's all about talent, and it's all about having the right people within your company to deliver the products and services for your customers. And we've seen in the last years how difficult it is to retain talent, how labor costs are rising, how unemployment rates are actually dropping, which means that people are also looking for the best opportunities where they want to bring their skills and their talent to work, and where they want to work actually. So although McKinsey already years and years ago talked about the war of talent, that was always about the A players, you could say, right? The top talent.
Yeah.
But more and more, you could say it's a much broader topic than only those top players or the top researchers or top marketing guys and girls. But it's much more about really getting the right skills on board. And specifically when you talk about startups, digital skills, software, cloud, the scarcity there is obvious. So the first thing is, how do you attract and how do you retain? Even before you start to thrive, right? And there, I see also coming from multinational company Signify, who's the global market leader in lighting, which is normally lighting industry is not such a key attractor, right? So when I talk to talent in the digital space, they rather go to Netflix or Spotify than they would join Signify, which is a lighting company. But then when you talk about our purpose that we have as a company, which is all about also sustainability and having a positive impact, reducing energy consumption, improving well-being in the office and at home through lighting, that starts to resonate with employees. And that's actually becoming a key attractor. It's not so much, you could say, the paycheck, but it's much more of what do you have to offer in terms of the values of your company, who you are as a company, where you stand for, what are your core values, and they will find that out in the conversations with the key leaders in the interviews. But also, what's your purpose? What's not only what are your products and services that you bring to, let's say, to your customers, but what impact do you have on the planet, and what impact do you have on society, and what strategy do you have to improve there? And that actually is becoming a key attractor, has been becoming a key attractor for us, because we had a huge ambition on transforming, making a positive impact on the transformation of the world in terms of sustainability through lighting. And it's actually been a key asset to attract and retain employees. So for CEOs and startups, I think that their thinking should start with, how do we position ourselves? Where do we differentiate? And how do we actually tap into those things that are important to the new generations? Because let's talk about my generation, maybe your generation also, Marian. But I think we were looking at it differently often about work and life, right? So we were looking at compensation, but we're looking also at possibilities to grow and advance our careers. But now the value fit, but also finding the right balance between your private life and your work life has become a big topic. And then again, the key question is, how do you position yourself as a company, small or large, in terms of the values and your purpose that you have?
Well, statistically, we're looking at that, and thank you for bringing this topic. Without purpose, it's not enough just to be successful or to pay well. In people, more and more exceptionally gifted talent, and also overall, people want to see, why am I doing this, and what's the impact I do beyond. So they really look at that, especially the Gen Z and obviously up and coming, probably Generation Alpha will be even looking for more at that, those topics. I always think of it that way, that it starts with the purpose, the vision, but also who is behind that purpose and vision, who is the leader that is doing it. And I think you really touched on this, that it's changing from focusing on a career to focusing on serving others. What are your, how would you perhaps describe the characteristic of a leader that can create such an inclusive culture, such a culture of thriving and produce exceptional results? Like the Big Corp, we've seen statistically that if an average growth of a company is about 5%, the Big Corp achieve more than 26%. Yeah. Statistically. So we see that's not a weakness, but we just want to understand from your experience what makes good to great. What are those characteristics where all leaders who are listening, that what they could do better to provide this, because the purpose is great, but if the execution, the leadership behind is not matching that, or not, it's not gonna work still.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and it's a great insight at the same time, because I've seen that my profession change, right? So human resources has changed, where in the past human resources was about the HR profession taking a lot of responsibility and direct care for employees. We now see that our key purpose in life is enabling people managers to do the work, because they are close to the teams, they are close to their people, and they actually make the biggest difference. And you see that coming back also in all the conversations that we now see around mental health, that the single biggest impact on mental health comes from direct managers, but also the single biggest impact in terms of people development and productivity comes from direct managers. And then it's all about, we talked a lot about at Signify about the key principles And you could ask yourself, what are our company's people principles, right? So how do we build not only individual strength around people managers or direct line managers, but also about, as from an organizational perspective, what are the key principles and values that you uphold? And for me, it's all about leading, developing, and inspiring. It's when we talk about leading, it's about creating an inspiring vision and connecting, let's say, the company's perspective and the company's strategy to the direct work of the team and the direct work of the employee, so that you can see as an employee also, how do I contribute to the larger entity, and where is my impact, and where is impact also comes back to fulfillment, right? And if you see your impact in the organization, if you see the fulfillment, then and also you see how you connect to other team members, I think that's the key thing. So leading is all about setting direction, creating a vision, creating, let's say, as people manager, also objectives for the year, objectives for the quarter, because there we've seen also the time horizon that we talk about changing. You see more and more performance management systems that are actually changing from an annual rhythm to a quarterly rhythm or a monthly rhythm of setting objectives and reviewing objectives. So that's the leading part, setting the direction. I think the second part is for me development. Development is all about how do you create, next to getting the work done, also a process where employees are actually growing professionally, growing personally, and where also the team is growing in terms of the way they work together. And that really requires dedicated attention from managers. It's not only about setting the content of the roles, but it's also about challenging your employees. And I think there, for me, and we talk to a lot about caring, and we use we use the word caring. For me means indeed really tapping into the person, seeing the person as a whole person, work and home elements. But also it's about sometimes being tough and raising the bar and raising expectations, because it's sometimes also good to kind of say, listen, I think you can do better. And why don't we see the impact of your work fully as I think that you can do? And what could you learn from others, right? So teaming employees up together, creating peer coaching, peer mentoring opportunities. So that's the development part. And the last part, of course, is all about inspiration. So connecting the larger human individual to how do you impact society, how do you create impact for the planet, but also about your personal inspiration. How do you walk the talk in terms of the company values as a leader? Right? How can I talk about great leadership or great people management skills if I don't show that in my own team or in the way I actually act on a daily basis? And I think there, kindness is a nice. I think we talk a lot about kindness also in terms of encouraging people, recognizing individual contributions, recognizing talent. But there again, walk the talk as a leader. I think that becomes a key part in terms of inspiration. It's not only about the vision that you picture, but it's also the way that you display yourself day to day at work, and how do you connect with people, and do you say good morning to the person that actually cleans the building when you come into the early morning, right? Or do you only say good morning to the boss? Those kind of small things, but they say a lot about who you are and what you do, and which is an inspiration to your team.
Thank you for sharing that framework, Mark, and it's really resonates so well. In fact, what these principles are so important, and they're systems that work and can help leaders. And I love what you just said. We're enabling the management or middle management to help their teams to thrive, and that means through all of those principles of helping them to grow and develop and inspire and produce those fruits, as you say, and be fruitful. It's like, I'll use an analogy. What's your favorite fruit, by the way?
My favorite fruit, I love apples. I love apples.
Let's use this as an analogy. Imagine you're an apple tree and you produce one of the most delicious apples. Like they're just so good, beautiful. Whether they're red, colorful, they look just fantastic. That they're full of big apples that you want to take from the tree and enjoy, really. But whether it's pity or fortunate, the apple tree cannot eat its fruits. It can produce them. They are for others to be eaten. And that's why I see in leadership that they need a good leader produces fruits that others can eat. And when you're fruitful, you will produce fruits every year. You will not be afraid to lose one fruit or somebody to take your one fruit, because next year you're going to have that again. Yeah. So that's where the feelings of insecurity, of being afraid you're going to lose a talent or not, because you're fruitful. And if you're a fruitful apple tree, imagine you're in the city center of Amsterdam with one of the most beautiful, fruitful apple tree that is full of fruits. I bet there'll be a queue to get these fruits until they're finished, and then they'll wait for next year to reproduce. So, and the same thing I see as talent, that you're fruitful and you give those fruits without fear and with all of your heart to your team, to your people, which is where it comes to development, where it comes to inspiring, where it comes to giving, you will always have abundance. And I also know that, I don't know whether you agree or not, but whatever you don't use, you lose. So if you don't give fruit, you will lose that opportunity. If you don't train your muscle, you lose the muscle. So it's important to give fruits every year. In other words, important to give so that you can be fruitful for a long time and be a blessing to humanity. I don't know whether you agree or not with that, but I always see that it's very important for leaders to produce fruits and not to be afraid of giving.
I fully agree. And I think it's actually taps into one of my key questions when I'm doing interviews with leaders. I always ask, so tell me all the different roles that you left, and did you grow a successor? Because that's for me one of the key points, key elements of bearing fruits, right? So are you growing successors within your organization? And are you taking pleasure in the fact that maybe sometimes even your team members become better than you were in that role? Are they outgrowing you? And do you take pleasure in that? Or let's say, do you put yourself in the front and center of everything? And I think it tells a lot about leaders, whether or not they are leaving a track record of growing successors within the company. And I think that tells a lot about, indeed, what you're saying about fruits.
That is really lovely, and tells a lot about the leader, because you could, with that question, you could very easily assess if the person is very self-centered or they really care about something greater than themselves.
True.
And so the question I have here is, because I'm sure you've come across also leaders or internally or middle management that they may not necessarily bear that much fruit. They may be more self-centered, but they want to change, for example. I mean, if the ones that don't want to change, that's a different story. We're not here to change people, but let's say we can only change ourselves. But the ones who really want to be better, how do you help them? Like, what's the journey? Like, what are the steps from transforming the character of that leader to from more, let's say, old-fashioned or more self-centered to really a leader who grows others, who bears fruits that people want to really have joy and want to have, and he also gives them joyfully, or she gives them joyfully. I'm just thinking of that gap, that journey, because I don't blame the leader or the person. I look at the mindset or the spirit. Like, if you drive a Ferrari and you go into a ditch, who is it to blame? Is it the car or is it the driver? So it's we just want to change the driver, I guess, but only if they want to. How do you help that situation? How do you help those people that want to be better?
No, I think it's a great question, which has two angles, I would say. There's an individual angle and there's a company angle, right? So I think it's also, to your point, what is the culture, the company culture? What is your soil as a company where you put your leaders in, right? to make them grow. And from a systematic perspective, the question is always for me, what do you reward, and do you build a learning culture? Because those are for me the key ingredients of having leaders which are open-minded, which are indeed eager to learn and to grow. What do you reward is the question of, are you only looking at the results, or are you also looking at how people are actually living the values in the company, how they actually are working within the broader team? And do you have a reward system that takes that into account? And do you have a promotion system where actually it's not only the question of who's the best salesperson, but also maybe who makes others better in sales, and who's best teaming up with marketing to come up with the best new innovations in terms of product portfolio. And do you take that into account in the way you assess and reward people? And are you creating that learner culture where you sometimes put people in an area where they may be a bit out of their comfort zone, and then you accept that they are less productive and maybe make some mistakes, but actually help them go through that and actually then go through the next level of actually their performance and their people leadership skills. So that's the more for the CEOs and the people that are actually building up their company. I think those are the key things to look at. How do I create a soil in my organization where I actually create fertile grounds for great leaders? On an individual level, for me, then it's a lot about open dialogue, mentoring and coaching, and spending time with people, actually. I often encourage people that are actually more closed because they're so much focused on delivering results and not making mistakes, that are sometimes scared of actually stepping out of their comfort zone or taking a bit of a risky step in terms of maybe with people also, right? Do you dare to give young talent a shot at that next role? Or are you always going for the already established contributors, but which might not bring the drive, the vision, and the creativity for the future? And that's for me a lot about mentoring and spending time with people. And I think that's, again, it's not an HR role. I love doing it. I love coaching people. But I think it's a role of CEOs also. Our CEOs, to every CEO, I would say, are you meeting young talent in your organization?
Yes.
Are you sharing your wisdom, your mistakes, the choices that you've made within your career that were good or maybe less good, but but that were still the foundation of your career? Are you sharing that with young talent? If you travel around in the world and you meet people in the organization, some in other countries, are you having lunches or breakfast meetings with young talent individually, in groups? Share, because they're eager to learn, and it's fun to share.
This is like the fruit, the analogy of the fruits, giving away your fruits. And
Exactly.
what a pleasant journey is that for a leader who really gives away those fruits, gives away the most precious thing they would have is their time to those future generations. And you know what? By doing that, they'll take care of your business. They'll take care of your clients.
True.
They'll take care of your growth. So there is a way that you can do things in a way more thriving way, even for the CEO, because I'm very focused as well. How can we take care of those leaders at the C-suite? Because if we do, they'll take care of others. That's the presumption. That is the really the focus. Because when you place a leader, as you say, or CEO or business unit president of 20,000 people, for example, that's 20,000 families.
True.
An average size of a family, 4, let's say, we're talking here 80,000 people directly impacted by that.
Yes.
And those leaders really, what is your advice to them? I mean, you've shared so much about the talent, really to do those, to reward the things that are, to think specifically how do you reward, and really create a system that have a lot of mentoring, a lot of giving to your mid-management, because that's where the real challenge is how can we get a large organization of tens of thousands of people to move in the same direction and align in that culture, especially when you do acquisitions, when you do all those different, do you see there's a lot of subcultures within the one large organization? How do you really bring them all united to be as one? It's always a challenge, I guess, but what is your experience on that when you have a global presence or multicultural, diverse workforce? How do you bring that together to have consistency?
Well, that's a great question. And there are that many cultural differences, differences within functions even, right? So the people in R&D and innovation are sometimes a bit of a different breed than in sales and marketing. I personally, that's for me one of the key joys in working in a large company, that you see all those differences, because if you are able to bring that together, then magic happens. At the same time, I think there's also a lot of similarities on the human level. When I talk to talent, it's all about also their family, respect for their parents. It's all about taking care of their kids, making sure that with work they are able to take care of the family. It's about their personal health and keeping a balance within one life. Those are all the things that we all have in common. And whether I'm in Poland or in China or in the US, when you have around the table conversations like this on a personal level, what are the important things in life? We find these common denominators where we make the human connections. But again, from an organizational perspective, the things that bind us together then in all these different cultures and all these different functions is, of course, our strategy and the values that we have in the company. So what's the purpose of your company? And I think we started there the conversation. How do you differentiate yourself? Do you have clear values that you live by as a leader, but also that you see back in the way how you attract people, how you reward people, how you give out awards? We all have often annual award ceremonies. Are your values coming back? Are they alive in your company, or are they next to the elevator only? Right. So the purpose and the values are, for me, the key glue that actually brings that multinational company together and all these different functions together. And I see great technology opportunities at this moment in time. We rolled out a program which was called Mentoring Without Borders, because now people work much more online. We do a lot of mentoring and coaching online, and we actually opened up a technology platform saying, if you want to be a coach, great, sign up in this tool, describe who you are, describe your key skills, describe the things that you actually see as your fruits, where you think that you could offer to others. And then we would say to all the other employees, well, if you want a coach or a mentor, go online, put in your request, look at the different coaches there, and find a connection. And the interesting thing is we had coaching connections between the US and China, or between people in innovation and in sales, because the people in innovation want to kind of strengthen their pitching skills, and they found somebody who was great in that, in marketing or in sales. So I think with all the new technology, we see much more of these cross connections that we before maybe did not have because of the physical environment that we only were looking for in coaching.
And this is, I guess, because we talk about belongingness and that culture where people are thriving. That is a great example of how you could create that connection, because for me, belongingness means that if I go to India, or if I go to US, or if I go to Netherlands or UK, I will feel the same sense of belongingness for the company, for the mission, for the vision. Yeah, there will be nuances and differences, which what makes it exciting about from the different cultures. That covers the blind spots, so to say. But I believe that interconnectedness is a great way, a great tool. What else is really good to, you mentioned the vision, the purpose, the reward system, the coaching, interconnecting. Is there any other key ingredients that, makes in other words, how can leaders create culture of belongingness if they do not have?
Yeah. Well, I think there's also the element of bring your team together. Sometimes just physical presence, and getting into deeper conversations. I think it's now there where there's much more opportunity with technology, and also through the pandemic that we've learned actually to work from home. We see much more remote work. I think it greatly taps into, let's say, also some of the requirements of young families, Generation Z, where there's a bit more freedom to work and be productive where it suits you best. But at the same time, I think if you really want to bring teams together and build that true connection, you need to meet also. You need to have that face-to-face, 360 full connection, which for me also means just bring your team together, bring them physically together, and also make sure that you have enough touch points in the office where you balance actually being together with maybe the freedom and the flexibility that remote working brings.
That's an interesting topic you touched on, because actually, I was reading a statistical number that young people, in fact, this is from TAPIN, they're really leaders in Gen Z, and especially looking into that, the largest Black Gen Z report they've done. And they mentioned that Gen Z often prioritize their mental health, their purpose and belongingness over pay even. And it's probably wisdom in that, because at the beginning, when you're young, you can certainly try different things. You can experiment different things. You don't want to just earn money, because sometimes you can earn a lot of money, but if that means that takes away 10 years of your life, I mean, it's a different different balance to calculate. So I think when you talk about really creating that balance of connectiveness and remote work, there's been a lot of with COVID triggering this, a lot of strong opinions. What do you think is there a great balance or great way to do that? So it's a mixture clearly between remote work, and it's personalized to the individual circumstance. So flexibility should exist. That's what I'm hearing that you mentioned. But also is important to connect, especially when you're working on the intense projects or something is urgent, because if you have that connection, you can do things faster, more efficient. When should people come into the office, basically, and why? Because often we see people that they ask to come to the office on a certain day, but then on that day there's nobody in the office and they do video calls. So what's the purpose of coming to the office? Just trying to really be sensible of when it makes sense. What's your take on that, especially for larger corporates?
No, I think there's a lot of conversation in the beginning of how many days, right? So how many days do you need to be in the office, and as if only just defining the number of days is the solution. I think your question much more on why do you come to the office is much more important, because I believe that the teams are stronger at problem solving, at creativity, when they actually are physically often together. So right.
Fair.
So I think it's much more about what team activities do you do. And when you talk about building trust, then sharing face to face about the things that you're facing, the things that you find difficult, maybe the challenges that you have with the customer, and where others can help. Let's say opening up and creating that trust. It also, in my experience, is much more powerful when you're together. So the question is for leaders is define the why. Define the why when people need to come together. What are the kind of activities where you want you have your team together? And then agree that flexibility goes both ways, right? Employees have flexibility to work from home when it's maybe suiting their schedule best, but also they need to give the same flexibility to the leaders and the employers say, okay, if it's needed, I come in also, right? So I think flexibility goes both ways, but it's the leader that steers the kind of activities that he or she wants to do in the office, face to face. And where you would say, listen, I leave these things more remotely. And that also differs, in my view, per the kind of roles, right? So there's work, if you do coding, I think there's a lot of stuff that you actually can do from home and individually. But if you do a stand-up agile meeting and you want to go back to, let's say, maybe your output on the software side and see how it connects to the customers' requirements and so on, I think those are the things where you actually do stand-up meetings with Agile, where you actually are together. So I think that's where the leader needs to play a role. One of the challenges I see that leaders are sometimes afraid to define what they need and where they think it's needed to be together. Right? So they feel sometimes that their role is, I give flexibility and employees can design their working life as they like. I think that's a mistake. So I think that leaders need to have a view on what are the important activities, when do I need my team together, and that's what I also will oppose to the team. I say, listen, these are the things when we need to be together. This is why it's important. On the other elements, I will give you the flexibility that you require.
Love it. It just makes so much sense and resonates because you need to really be clear on the why. Why do I want my team here? Well, it could be very clear. We're facing a crisis. We're facing a growth. We're facing a challenge. We need a creative session. But what you're saying is when I bring the team together, that's a power session where everybody feels, where everybody's together and we unlock the best of all, the Voltron, as we say, all the forces come together and we get all this energy, all these ideas, and you create that, you take advantage of that. And of course, you give them the flexibility and you always explain why is important. So it's not just come here because I asked you, but no, this is why this matters. And this is why it's so important. And I think it comes to clear communication. And that's why the leader needs that.
Clear communication, clear expectations. And that creates actually a positive spiral, because then when employees come in and they have that creative session or the problem solving session, or there's something that they need to tackle, and they actually manage to do that, it gives a lot of fulfillment, right? So, and they directly see why they come to the office, because it gives output, it gives energy. And to your point, it doesn't give energy to come in on Monday or on Tuesday when actually nobody's there that you actually want to meet with, right? So I think I fully agree. I think if you do that well as a leader, it becomes obvious also to the team.
Love it. Can leaders focus equally on care and business results? What is the balance, do you think? Or is one directly linked to another? I mean, the question here is...
I would ask the other connection. Would you see great business results without caring?
I love that.
I don't. Not on the longer term. Not on the longer term.
Thank you.
Because then human resources becomes a fuel that you burn up, and then you go to the next set of employees, right? So I think I don't believe that. If you really want to connect people to your organization, if you want that they act out of the same understanding of the purpose and the values, and how do you actually contribute and create value for your customers, you need to care for them.
I really value that, Mark, and I know you learned a lot of lessons from your extensive HR career that you've shared some of it. But what are perhaps the moments or the game-changing moments for you? Was there really a major shake or major disruption for you in your own career? Because I guess every one of us have their own testimonials, right? Of when things have really changed. What are those moments where things really lifted and transformed for you?
Well, I think the key moments. It's interesting. I think the key moments are either when you make a next step into a role change, right? So when you become from an individual manager to a team manager, or in my case, I started to lead a global HR services organization, where I was first managing a team of 12, and I was later on managing all of a sudden a team of 400. So how do you lead a team of 400, which are actually globally spread out? You need to reinvent yourself in terms of your leadership style. How do you connect? How do you create belonging? How do you create personal credibility to a team of 400, right? And how do you do that through your managers and through your leaders in the organization? For me, that was one of the key thinking points in my leadership style. Because I couldn't touch it directly anymore. When you're contributor or manager, it's much more direct. But when you're leading a larger organization, you need to put more thinking into that, and you need to put more effort into also bringing your leaders and your managers along. But also recently, I stepped out of my career actually, and we didn't mention it, but you said former CHRO of Signify. Actually, 8 months ago, I actually left for my career because one of my kids had a serious accident, and I said to myself at that moment in time, well, I cannot combine these two, right? I cannot give everything I have in the role of CHRO and everything I have in my role as father. And being there for the family. So I said, I step out and I take a bit of a pause. And actually pause in my career, my professional career, but actually really, I was always saying my family is most important. Well, that was the moment to show that, right? And I stepped out and I have no moments regret of that. I'm looking forward to start something new soon again, but I think that has been for me also a defining moment. And actually it's been extremely rewarding as a family then to be in difficult times actually together and to show resilience and if you face some life challenges together.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. And being a father is one of the greatest blessing and gift we could have, and it means being a sustainer, being a protector, and yes, you have done that in a very critical moment, and this is when we talk about care and being. We all have our own vulnerabilities and difficult moments, but how you deal with them is really important, and to have the strength and the blessing that we need. How do you take care of yourself, having all these things going through, all these challenges, all these defining moments? What are your what gives you what recharges you, what gives you energy? Because it's important how hard you work, but also important how well do you rest?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a lot about who are the people that you surround yourself with. So do you have trusted relationships around you, spouse, friends, where you can have the deep conversations and where you can have fun with. For me, that's one of the things how I recharge myself, and I think also continuing to invest in these relationships in the good times so that they are there also in the time that you need them. I think is the critical thing. And the other thing is I love to be outdoors. I love to go hiking. I love to go running. These kind of things give me energy. Being in nature and just enjoying a bit of creation. And soaking that in, and that gives me a lot of energy also. So making time for that.
Nice. Well, that is really great to hear. I also very much value your respect, your values, your care for people, and I know, of course, that it takes a big part, because here in the Western world we tend to have a little bit neglected our spiritual life, and I understand that. And I always when I speak to some of the greatest leaders out there, including CEOs of multi-billion companies, often that's not put at the first point, but it is the first point. It is really so important, because whatever we see in the physical realities, it comes first in the spiritual. And I know people use science and there are different debates, which I love to have with people and CEOs. But what is your advice to people that perhaps are not, especially business leaders, that may not be so spiritual, but start to understand the importance of really, and what I mean by spiritual, obviously, how do I here in the West, there's a reason and systems we followed why we're here, why we're so successful, which have been neglected more and more in let's say in the last few decades. But I see a revival as well. What are your thoughts on this for the ones that are seeking?
Well, I think those are deep questions. I think it starts with the question of what makes life meaningful, right, to you.
Fulfillment. You talked about what gives you fulfillment.
Exactly, and what gives you meaning of life. And for me also, what do you search sometimes outside of yourself? And I think that's a bit of the cultural element, I think, that we've seen through the ages. I think we've become more and more self-centered. And we've lost connection with communities. And I myself, we have a local church where we actually have a lot of connection with, which gives you, I think the social community connection, but also the more deeper spiritual connection, which also gives me energy and which helps me to make sense of life and I think sometimes the challenges that you find on your way, but also where you found a deep foundation. It gives you, I would almost say, sometimes peace in difficult environments, right? And if you experience that, you can also share that with the people that you meet. And I think everybody finds that in their own unique ways. And I think we need to have respect for each other, of course, but actually invite each other then to look for that deeper meaning that gives you that balance and peace in life also.
Oh, thank you for sharing that indeed. And that's so important to talk about peace, because someone said to me, the ultimate failure in life is success without fulfillment. And you may have a lot of success, a lot of riches, but if you don't have peace, that's something you need to work on thoroughly. And what you just said really resonates a lot. Well, final words here. What are your hopes for more caring world for the future generations? What would you love to see for your children's children?
Well, I love to see that we will find stronger communities again, and I'm hoping that I can start wherever I am. I think a trigger that also, but I talk to my kids also a lot about that, building communities, belonging somewhere, taking care. And being taken care of. I think it's some of the things that we've lost, especially a lot in Western society. And if you look at how many people have challenges with their mental health, how many people are actually lonely, even young people, even with all the social media, or especially maybe through all the social media. And it's not to blame somebody, but it's striking how all these things that we thought that were there to bring us belonging and connection is actually doing the opposites. And I think we should rethink that for ourselves. And hopefully we can bring that back.
What a great wish. And Mark, thank you so much for taking the time. Blessings go out to you, your family, your work, and everything you do in your community. Thank you for sharing those useful insights. It's been a great pleasure to have you today. And thank you for being a leader who cares.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.